Who runs Afghanistan after the disputed presidential election results, and how will that impact the talks with the Taliban? With Ashraf Ghani declared the winner by the smallest of margins, his opponent, Abdullah, says he'll form a parallel administration. The US wants to pull out while pushing for peace at the same time. After 40 years of war and conflict, how will the key players resolve this latest crisis? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. Now, in 2014, their rivalry resulted in a US-brokered deal to share power, which was punctuated by 5 years of bickering. And now Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah are again disputing an election result. Ghani is officially the winner, but only just, and that's rejected by Abdullah, who shares power with the president as chief executive. He's now threatening to form his own parallel government. This political showdown couldn't come at a more critical time for Afghanistan. The US and the Taliban do appear close to an agreement that could lead to a planned reduction in violence. And if that posture is largely maintained, it could be a precursor to Afghan politicians sitting opposite the Taliban. But how can any of that happen until we know who runs Afghanistan? Rory Challens sets up our discussion.
Since September, Afghanistan's election commission has been sifting complaints and contested votes, trying to work out whether Ashraf Ghani has the 50% plus one vote needed to avoid a runoff. He does. It's finally announced, but only just.
According to the Constitution, we declare Mr. Ashraf Ghani, who recovered 923,592 votes, which is equal to 50.64% of the country's total vote in the election, as the president-elect of the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan.
The incumbent is naturally celebrating.
I'm dedicating this victory of the people to the people, and as the first servants with our united team, we will always safeguard the rights of the Afghan people.
But although the decision puts months of electoral uncertainty to rest, it opens a new chapter of danger. Just like when Ghani was ruled the winner in 2014, his main rival, Abdullah, is calling the result illegitimate.
The result they announced today was the result of election robbery, a coup against democracy, the betrayal of the will of the people, and we consider it to be illegal.
In 2014, the US brokered a power-sharing agreement with Ghani president and Abdullah chief executive. This time round, the US is doing deals with the Taliban. They're near an agreement in Doha, which could be announced soon if an initial reduction in violence is successfully observed first. The US wants to bring its troops home. But the Taliban also says Ghani's re-election is illegal and contravenes the peace process. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera.
OK, let's bring in our guests. Joining us today from Kabul is Tamim Asey. He's formerly a Deputy Minister of Defence and the Executive Chairman of the Institute of War and Peace Studies, a Kabul-based think tank. And joining us from Islamabad is Simbal Khan, Political and Security Analyst. Welcome to you both. Coming to you first, Tamim, we've been here before 2014, but this is a little bit different because of the dynamic that's surrounding the Taliban.
Yeah, we have been here before, but the difference is basically threefold. First, at that time, we haven't had a peace deal hanging on the horizon. The second reason, which is different, is we don't have a foreign mediator like John Kerry, former Secretary of State, to come to Kabul and mediate between the two candidates. And the third factor, which makes it very different, is you have a president who has been almost isolated politically without a big political base. And that is why I think this time it would be much more difficult in terms of reaching to some sort of an electoral agreement. But my belief is that we'll run into either of the two scenarios. First, we will go to what I call National Unity Government 2.0, or some sort of a participatory government, again another one. Or the second option is you will have the current president leading the government, but he will have a limited term until the peace agreement comes to some sort of a conclusion, and then we call for an early election.
Simbel Khan in Islamabad, a National Unity Government 2.0. How would that work? Indeed, could it work?
I really don't think that is going to be an option now with the way the situation has unfolded, especially some announcements today from Abdullah calling to the Interior Ministry to intervene and stop the independent election commissioners from leaving the country. Although I don't know why that happened, because we have no information whether the Independent Election Commission members were indeed planning to travel out of the country or not. I think it was just a bit of muscle flexing. It is very dangerous, this kind of muscle flexing, which indicates some kind of an institutional split among the state in the state institutions in Afghanistan. It seems with this announcement that Abdullah was hinting that he does control certain security-related institutions, as you know, under Ministry of Interior. Various kinds of security, internal security instruments are controlled by the Ministry of Interior. It is traditionally supposed to have been controlled by people from the Northern Party, from Abdullah's factions. So not a very good sign at all. I think the unity government doesn't seem to be something that's possible now. I do agree with my friend from Afghanistan that some kind of a resolution where Ghani might be allowed to continue in an interim kind of a setup might be something that's workable. I think my friend from Kabul also mentioned that there is no involvement of a high-level personality, but I think that's going to probably change very soon now. I think there is going to be more involvement, or I definitely very strongly feel that there should be more high-level involvement right now. I think that kind of a firefighting is going to happen. The call for an interim setup was there for some time. I think it was there before the elections happened, and I think even Pakistani government had put itself into a bit of a trouble by Prime Minister Imran Khan saying that such an interim setup should exist, and Afghanistan is not ready to go into an election phase right now.
Tamim, let's just come back to you for a second. Tamim, Asey in Kabul. We should, however, in theory now be heading into intra-Afghan discussions, which should dovetail with the Taliban, quotes, peace process. Is that now completely in jeopardy?
No, that's not in jeopardy. We haven't started the intra-Afghan talks yet. And we will have to look into who will be the negotiating team, what could be the different layers of negotiations and how a deal might conclude. It took Americans almost 1 year and plus some months to come to some sort of an agreement now initial with the Taliban. I think the intra-Afghan talk will be much more time-consuming, much more of a bumpy ride and much more complicated. But to clarify a few things, I think I need to mention it. First of all, the Afghan National Defense and Security Force is a truly national and professional force right now. There's no more Northern Alliance or Southern or, I don't know, Eastern controlling the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. It's a national force, it's a professional force, and it has stayed away throughout all of the elections, the previous elections, which all of them were one way or another disputed, stayed out of it. The other thing is that, yes, Abdullah wrote a decree trying to bar the commissioners to get out, but that was a political maneuvering. Everybody knows. And today, the Interior Ministry of Afghanistan basically said that, yes, we respect what he wrote, but we abide by the laws, and it's the Attorney General of Afghanistan which decides who should be on an exit, control list type of a thing that exists in Pakistan. Or the other issue, which is, I think, very, very important for all of us in terms of the implications of this electoral crisis on the peace process, is we need to have a government first in here. We need to have a president. We need to have somebody in charge. The Afghans were tired for the last 5 months that this fiasco has been going on. And now finally, we have a president, and I think with all its problems, we need to accept that there is a president, but we need to show some sort of a wisdom. And this president, the who's announced through the IEC as the winner, has to do three things. First, form a broad-based government and reach out to different political actors in Afghanistan. The second thing he needs to do is engage with our neighbors, because some of them have serious reservations about some of the policies that our government has been pursuing. And the third thing is put peace high on the agenda. In terms of the interim government, no Afghan will accept an interim government. We are not going back to square zero, to square one, basically. The Afghans want some sort of a transition mechanism under the existing republic. How would that come out will be a decision or an agenda item in the intra-Afghan talk. Okay. But definitely not an interim government. An interim government is going back in history.
I meant a transitional. If I can just come in and interrupt here, I think when we met, it's a matter of semantics. An interim setup, a transitional government, it is again something. A transitional government is also a kind of an interim setup before the dialogue starts or before the end of the dialogue or some kind of a peace deal is made. And as you yourself are pointing out that you don't think this process is going to be interrupted, that it's going to go on. I mean, there are lots of, and you're referring to the neighbors also, there are lots of concerns that the neighbors right now have, especially one of the neighbors, Pakistan, which has put a lot of its kind of value to start of the negotiations. We put a tremendous amount of diplomatic as well as political capital into helping start these negotiations. Out of all the neighbors that you have, one neighbor that has really been pushing it has been Pakistan. We right now, the mechanism that was decided with this 7-day.
But Pakistan has also been the main source of the problem. Yes, Pakistan has been a safe haven to the Taliban leadership.
Sure. But I just want to move on and talk about the peace deal that the Trump administration was ready to sign with the Taliban in the next days. And then there had to be a mechanism to, when you talk about reduction in violence, there has to be a mechanism in place which would judge how you validate or not validate this reduction in violence. With the upheaval that's going on right now in Afghanistan, with the concerns around how all these institutions within Afghanistan are going to work, do you possibly think that these processes will continue uninterrupted by the disruption that you've just seen?
Tamim, would you like to come back on that point?
Well, yes, I think we appreciate what Pakistan is doing for the Afghan peace, but let's not forget history. And let's also not forget that Taliban leadership frequently flies to Pakistani cities to consult with their leadership.
That's not my question, Tamim.
But no, I will come to your question, but I would like to say that if Pakistan is doing anything, it's because they need to do it because they're the source of the problem. And they have been for many, many years, and that's why Khalilzad keeps traveling to GHQ and talking to the chief of army.
I don't particularly want to get into a discussion about the relationship between the Taliban in Afghanistan and the Taliban in Pakistan and who gets sanctuary where. That's a different discussion, which we have had on this channel, and I dare say we'll have it again. Simbal, coming back to you. Assuming that these two men, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, can work together, is there another dynamic that they have to be aware of? Rewind to the election 5-6 months ago, 2 million people cast their votes. But democracy is not alive and well in Afghanistan because potentially 9.6 million people could cast their votes. So there's something very wrong there to start with.
I think I'll come back to my earlier point in response to this, that, there was not just in Pakistan, I mean, around the world, the other stakeholders, especially the US stakeholders, Ambassador Khalilzad and other people who are very deeply involved, especially the Afghanistan's European partners like the Germans. Everyone was of the opinion that the time wasn't ready because of the problems that you're pointing out, because of the problems with how the democratic system has been unfolding last 15 years in Afghanistan. It's not really the fault of the Afghans. It's basically trying to build a democratic system within a conflict zone, within a long-term war zone. These problems are quite endemic. Because of those shortcomings, elections should not have happened. and because they were pushed through for various other reasons, which of course
No,
one
I'm
was
sorry.
the push of
Elections should have happened. Elections should have happened. What? No,
let me finish my
I
point.
need to intervene here because elections should happen. It's not for the neighbors. It's not for the neighbors and
Let me
others
just
to
finish
tell
my
that
point.
elections shouldn't
Can I
happen in
just finish?
Afghanistan, undermine our constitutions.
Can I just finish? I am not trying to paint the desire, especially pushed through by Ghani administration, to have the elections as something evil that Ghani administration wanted to do. I do understand the frustration that President Ghani faced through this unity government that went on. Nothing really actually worked during that time. I've talked also to tremendous number of Afghan commentators like yourself. Everybody was frustrated because of the lack of progress that was happening with services, with everything, because of this problem of an unconstitutional unity government that came through because of the last 2014's election process.
Okay,
so there were frustrations.
just let me stop you there and answer this question for me. Out of these two men, Ashraf Ghani, Abdullah, which one of the two is more predisposed to talk to the Taliban for the good of the country?
I think Abdullah most, and Ghani as well. I think both of them want to talk to the Taliban. I don't think this issue is about talking to the Taliban at all. The issue is about who exercises and how to exercise power within Afghanistan and how the system is functioning. The issue between them is not based or around the talks with the Taliban.
Okay, and Tamim, Asey in Kabul, the US Defense Secretary Mark Esper hinting just in the past 24 hours there is some wriggle room here because it's not, the timetabling and the choreography isn't necessarily set in stone. So what's the conversation, do you think, that's taking place between the Trump administration that wants to get out but knows it can't leave a vacuum in Afghanistan? Because at the moment they've got about 13,000 US personnel on the ground in the country from a peak of 100,000, and it costs billions of dollars every year. So the Trump administration, it wants to be gone from that situation. But what's the conversation to keep it moving forward?
Well, right now, the Trump administration would like to reduce its troops in Afghanistan, but they definitely, as Mark Esper and others have also indicated, as well as Secretary Pompeo, they don't want to leave Afghanistan. And if you have read Times Magazine article, there are secret annexes within this agreement, which will pave the way for a long-term USCT presence, and Taliban have agreed to that. If Time magazine is to be believed, which is a very, very credible source based on whatever interviews they had within the U.S. administration. Now, the question is, who within the Afghan side will be able to come to some sort of an agreement with the Taliban? It should be the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the government, the sitting government, leading the talks, the intra-Afghan talks, and reaching to some sort of an agreement with the Taliban on various terms. And there has to be hard compromises made there from one side or the other.
And Simbal Khan in Islamabad, why is it in Afghanistan it is such a difficult problem to solve talking to the Taliban? I mean, the US has spent overall $900 billion fighting the Taliban, in effect. But the Taliban is still so strong. It still controls 50% of the country.
Yes, true. I think that fact that the growing power of Taliban and territorial control is something that's constantly reflected in UN reports as well as US military's own reports on that. But why the issue of dialogue with Taliban is so difficult? I think it's basically this, what I've hinted before, this kind of a power construct between who actually holds power in the Afghan government. That is a bigger factor that is stopping the negotiations. But there has been a lot of consensus building within Afghanistan over this issue of negotiations. A few years ago, there was a big factional split over who actually really wanted to talk to the Taliban within Afghanistan. But over the last year, especially the last year, that we've seen a more kind of an incremental increase of dialogue between the US and the Afghan Taliban, these opinions have changed, and there is a growing consensus among all political actors inside Afghanistan who do think that political negotiation with Taliban is something that they are interested in. And I think that consensus is there. But basically, it is which part of the Afghan who are going to talk to the Taliban is the real issue. Who represents the government of Afghanistan?
Understood. Tamim, is talking to the Taliban, Tamim, the only scenario? And bear with me on this one. Is it possible to get beyond the Taliban, or do they have to be dealt with? Because I'm thinking 1979, the Soviet Union invades. 1989, the Soviet Union leaves. But in 1989, that government went on to last for, what, 2.5 or 3 years?
Well, I would like to, before I answer your question, I would like to say a few things. First, number one, the Taliban do not control 50% of this country. They don't even control a single provincial capital. They control around 17 districts, and we need to be very careful when we throw out those statistics. And the statistics are based on threat assessment, not based on control factor. The other thing which I would like to mention, all Afghans want peace. The survey that my institute did, the survey that the Asia Foundation did, the survey that the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies did, more than 80% of Afghans, including areas controlled by the Taliban, population controlled by the Taliban, say that this war has to end and there needs to be a political settlement. And I think both the Taliban and the Afghan government have realized that there is a military stalemate. In terms of the comparison of the Soviet to the American experience, I think that's the circumstances have considerably, the historical circumstances are very different than what we see. But the Americans invested in Afghanistan or fought in Afghanistan because of Al-Qaeda and because of other terrorist groups which were based here, not because necessarily of the Taliban. The Taliban were host to these terrorist groups.
Okay, Tamim, I'm going to pause you there because we are heading quickly towards the end of the program. Simbel Khan in Islamabad. Forgive me if my next question sounds incredibly naive, bordering on stupid. What would peace in Afghanistan look like? You have to be 45, 50, 55 years old to remember a time when the country was basically at peace.
I think basically peace in Afghanistan realistically could look like where the big conflict between the Taliban and the Afghan various factions in Afghanistan, especially the Afghan state, comes to an end. And there is a limited international presence present there. As Tamim was saying, I agree, there is possibly going to be, for some foreseeable future, some limited presence of international troops, that they are still there, but there is a larger peace negotiation which succeeds in the end, and there is an end to large hostilities. I don't think there will be complete peace in Afghanistan. There are various smaller and bigger groups still there fractured. There might be, deals might break up, but the best possible scenario would be that there is this larger negotiated end to the big war between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government and the state and some of the other political actors as well. I think that's the best possible scenario. It won't be perfect peace. Lots of insecurities still in Afghanistan and instabilities, which need a bigger developmental answer rather than just a force-based answer.
Last point to you, Tamim. What we're talking about is ending 40 years of war, hundreds of thousands of deaths, in effect. That's what we're talking about, a country that has been at bottom for a long time. Is the direction of travel, despite the election result, despite the relationship between Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani, is it still moving in the right direction for you?
It is. We are on the right track. Peace is we are on a peace track. I think we have invested for the last 18 years and before that on war. Let's invest on peace. And what I do agree is that it is a dream for everybody or for anybody who thinks, it's almost like wishful thinking to think that the Afghan war will completely vanish with the peace deal with the Taliban. I think the big scale war will go away. You will still have some sort of skirmishes around the country because this war will transform into a new war, but the scale of it will be much, much lesser. We already see that some of the Taliban ranks are switching sides and basically changing flags and becoming ISKP and to other groups, but they will be manageable once the big war between the Taliban and the Afghan government comes to some sort of a political settlement. So with that regard, I totally agree, but thinking that this war will finish overnight because there's a peace deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and there will be some sort of a limited presence of the international forces here to do CT operations. That is doable, but the war will not finish. The war will transform into some sort of a lesser scale skirmish.
Okay, thank you for that. We have to leave our discussion there. Thank you to our two guests. They were Tamim Asey and Simbal Khan, and thank you too for watching the programme. You can see the show again anytime by going to our website, aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, do check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet me, I'll tweet you back. I'm @PeterDobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha, thanks for watching. I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.